Sunday. He's risen. He was in the grave, but then he came back. We won. That is something that we need to be excited about. That is something that we have reason to rejoice about, something that we can celebrate. Amen. We as Christians were taught that we need to be joyous in all situations, in the midst of hardship, in spite of sadness, in spite of loss. But today, we have reason to celebrate. Now, did you know that we have some examples of how to celebrate in the Bible? Did you know that? Let me give you a few examples. And tell me if you would like to maybe celebrate in these ways. In 2 Samuel, chapter 6, verses 14, the first half of it, it talks about King David. After they brought the tabernacle and everything back to the city, David decided to go dancing. Alright, it says, wearing his linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all of his might. He was dancing so hard that it was making people uncomfortable. So, this was the man that God said is the man after God's own heart. And he was dancing. He was probably white because it made everyone so uncomfortable when he was dancing. He's kind of like my spirit animal. Alright, another example of how we are to celebrate. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 65. So Solomon and all of Israel with him in a great assemblage coming from Labanah to the Wadi of Egypt, observed a feast at that time before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days again, 14 days in all. So you can go ahead and call into work and say, hey, yeah, I just heard in the Bible that we can celebrate for 14 days, so I'll see you in 2 weeks because I gotta go eat. We are to celebrate when things good are going on. Alright, so now I'm probably getting way ahead of myself here. Oh, wait, it's there. Hey! Good job back there. So, yeah, dance like the man after God's own heart and party like a king. So how many people are going to eat well today? Alright, I hope so too. Alright, so moving on. But wait, how can we know that we can trust the New Testament? How do we know that what we are reading is true? Well, let's take a look at some of the things that we have that historians and the very smart intellectual people with more letters after their name than in their name. How do they decide when they find some sort of manuscript? How do they think? How do they figure out that it's true? So the first one we're going to look at real quick is a historian called Tacitus. He wrote a book called the Annals. Alright, that was written, wow, that's really small up there, so sorry for that. It was written around the year 100. The first fragment, the first copy of it that they found, wasn't until around the year 900. So there was about 800 years between when he wrote it and when they found it. And we have a total number of 2 copies of that. But no one disputes the authenticity of the Annals by Tacitus. Another book, The Gallic Wars by Caesar. Alright, that was written around 50 BC. So, a little bit of an older book there. Alright, the earliest copies were also found around the year 900, so there's about 950 years between when it was written and when we found the first fragments or copy of it. How many copies of that do we have? 10. 10 total. Any more? How about Plato? Anyone who has ever gone to school has heard something about a man named Plato, or you played with Plato. Alright, he wrote the Platonic Dialogues around 350 BC. The first copies that we found were also around 900, so that's quite a year for finding really old books. So roughly about 1,250 years between when he wrote it and when we found the first copies of it. are 7 copies in total that we have found. Or Herodotus, the Histories, written around 430 BC. We found the first copies around 900 again. It's about 1,350 years in between when it was written and when we found it, and there's a total of 9 copies. And no one disputes the authenticity of these works. How about the New Testament? The New Testament was written between the years of 45 and 95 because there are a lot of different authors to it. Our earliest copies were found around the year 125, which means we found the earliest copies between 50 years, roughly around 50 years from when they were written, with the earliest ones only being about 25 years after they were written. All right? And we have approximately 26,000 copies of those original manuscripts. And yet, all of those other books where we only found like 1 or 2 copies or 10 copies at the most, no one disputes those. But anyone with all those letters after their name say that that's possibly wrong. So we have some things to think about there. In many cases, those books were actually written by eyewitnesses, people who actually knew Jesus. The ones who weren't written by the people who knew Jesus interviewed people who knew Jesus. Eyewitness accounts. That's a little bit hard to kind of overcome there, isn't it? So, a little bit about what I'm going to be going in today now that I got some of my teacher out. It's Resurrection Sunday. So we're going to read the resurrection story. I'm going to throw in a little bit of commentary as we go along, because I have to have my 2 cents in everything that I do. So I will do my best to make sure that you get out of here on time for work tomorrow. All right? Good? All right, so if you want to follow along, open up your Bibles to Matthew 26. We're going to start there with the plot against Jesus. So when Jesus had finished saying all of these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." And the chief priests and elders of the people assembled in the palaces of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they plotted to arrest Jesus, and in some slay him and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. So while Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which he poured over his head while he was reclining at a table. Then the disciples saw this, and they were indignant. Why waste such expensive perfume when it could be sold and the money given to the poor? Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing for me. The poor you will always have, but you will not always have me. And when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." And here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still talking about her. All right, then Judas agrees to betray Jesus. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and asked, "What are you willing to give me for me to hand him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 silver coins. And from then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of this feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat over the Passover?" And he replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house." So the disciples did as Jesus said, and they went and prepared the Passover. When the evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table of the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him, "Lord," one after another, "Surely, Lord, not I." Not me. I would never betray you." They were sad. And Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as is written about him. But woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him to have not been born." And then Judas, the one who was to betray him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." And Jesus answered, "Yes, it is you." While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Now, I found this to be interesting. How many of you have friends and family? Well, not really friends, I guess, in this case. But you don't really get along with them. Anytime that you actually see them, you tend to get into fights or arguments or just all kinds of stress and drama. Just think about that for a moment, and then relay it back to what Jesus did here. He was eating a meal with the man that he knew was going to betray him to get killed. The man that he knew was going to be the source of his torture and death. He sat there and he ate with him. I think there's an important lesson in that. That sometimes our petty squabbles might be just that, petty. So let's learn to follow him with the other things that he has taught us and forgive. Because today we're to celebrate. And we're going to let little petty things prevent us from being able to be happy and to celebrate the great things that are going on today. So we continue. Then Judas, the one who said he was going to betray him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." When they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." They weren't cannibals. They weren't actually eating Jesus. It was bread. Okay? It's a metaphor. I heard some people out there actually thought that they were eating Jesus, and it's just a really odd thing. So you people out there in YouTube land, he's not a cannibal. He wasn't feeding himself to people. He was breaking bread and using it as a metaphor. Okay? Then he took the cup and said, "Thanks," and offered it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you, for many, for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now until the day that I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." This is another interesting point I'm going to be bringing up later, but just keep that in mind that he decided that he was not going to drink any wine, any grape juice, anything that came from the fruit of the vine he was not going to touch until he was in heaven. Alright. Afterwards, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So Jesus, even knowing that he was going to die and be betrayed by one of his friends, he decided that he was going to sing. Which, thank you, Murph and Brad, for that wonderful duet up here. I think that should happen more often. You guys were great.
Amen.
All right. Then Jesus predicts Peter's denial. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away from the account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will scatter." Even though every single one of them said, "I will not betray you," it was not me. By the end of that same night, every one of them denied him. We like to focus on Peter, but every one of them fall away. "After I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." And Peter replied, "Even if all fall on account of you, I never will." Which is a good point to remain humble. Because it mentions that the other disciples throughout this dinner just said, no, Lord, I won't betray you. But then Peter being the man's man, Peter being the man that says, I'm better than that. Look how good I am, because I will never betray you. He's the one that the story focuses on here. Because God says, they're both the same. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. But then Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you, and the other disciples said the same. So the others followed Peter's example, but Peter decided to be the one who spoke up. After that, they went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane and said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. I'm going on a little farther. He fell on his face on the ground and he prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. For those of you who remember my sermon about prayer, that is the thing that we need to keep in mind, is that we are praying for God's will to be done, and how can we help fulfill it. I brought this part up in that sermon for that reason. Because even though Jesus, the Son of God, the most perfect man who ever lived, was praying his heart out, he still said, I don't want this to happen, but if it's what you want, I'm here. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Could you men not watch over me for an hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And he went away for a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back again, he found them sleeping again because their eyes were heavy. So then he left them and went away one more time. And he prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. And he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. And while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived with him. And there was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent by the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer has arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said to him, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Let me make sure I'm not overdoing myself here. Yep. And Jesus replied, friend, do what you have came for. And then the men stepped forward and seized Jesus and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for a sword, drew it, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Put that sword back into place, Jesus said to him. For all who draw the sword die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But then how will the scriptures be fulfilled that say this must happen this way? And at the time, Jesus said to the crowd, Am I leading a rebellion that you have come at me with swords and clubs? Why are these people coming armed? They're coming armed to collect a teacher, a man who is known for peace. That when his own followers go out and try to attack somebody in defense of him, he tells them to stop. And yet these men came at him with swords and clubs, and there's probably a few torches and pitchforks in there just for flavor. What kind of monster are they going to try to capture? All right. Every day he sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place so that the writings of the prophets may be fulfilled. And then all the disciples deserted him and fled. His friends ran. His brothers. The people who were there with him from the beginning and saw everything that he did ran. Because that's the way it was written. That's the way it was supposed to be. It's almost like somebody knew. So before the Sanhedrin, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, "This fellow said, I am going to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is the testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. Jesus couldn't lie. So he couldn't dispute that because he did say it. He wasn't going to allude to anything that was untrue. So the priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds in heaven." And when the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do you need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face, struck him with fists, and others slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who hit you?" It sounds a lot like middle school. I was a substitute teacher for about 10 years. This is the kind of stuff little kids pull. And yet we had grown men, people who were leaders of the community, beating and mocking the man that had done nothing wrong other than teach. All right, now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, but the servant girl came to him and said, "You were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But then he denied it before them all, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then he went to the gateway where another girl saw him and said, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth," and he denied it again with an oath and said, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them, for your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses on himself and swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words that Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and he wept bitterly. The spirit of the man was broken. This is a real big thing on YouTube now, too. They call it karma. Where you'll have somebody who stands up and say, "Look how great I am," and they'll do something and completely fail at it. This is kind of like a prophecy in that regard, because that was something that people wanted to know about also. Peter failed. Peter, the man who was saying that I am the man. No matter what happens to these other guys, I will die before I deny you. Realized that he had failed. I know I've fallen into that a couple of times. Where I allowed my ego to get the best of me. It's amazing how God can set us straight. Early in the morning, all of the chief priests and others of the people came to a decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him and led him away to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse, returning the 30 silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, "I have sinned, I have betrayed innocent blood." "What is that to us?" they replied. "That's your responsibility." So Judas threw out the money to the temple and left. And then he went away and hung himself. And the chief priest picked up the coins and said, "It's against the law for us to put this in the treasury since it was blood money." So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it is called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, and they took 30 silver coins and set the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used it to buy the potter's field as the Lord had commanded. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. And then he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, and he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd, that at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over. While Pilate was sitting in the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "Don't have anything to do with the innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want the governor to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" Pilate asked, and they answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." And then Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead he saw that an uproar was starting. So he took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." But all the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and our children." And then they released Barabbas to him. Then they had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. See, really, this was the point of no return for him. And because it is a rather long reading, I'm going to break it up a little bit. Because this is a point where you can start to see the psychology of the resurrection. The psychology of Jesus. Because people have said, he was just a good teacher. That's all he was. Some people say he was a liar. Some people say he was crazy. We don't know any crazy people, do we? You might have one standing in front of you if you don't, so you can chalk that up as one. But I want to talk a little bit about that psychology. Liar, lunatic, or Lord. He could have been a liar. But how does that hold water? How does that argument hold water? He died for what he was teaching. Now, a man will die for a lie, I will give you that, but only if it's a lie that he believes in. If it's a lie that he knows a lie, is he going to go through suffering? Is he going to be tortured and die taking that lie with him? Not likely. Besides, if he was a liar, that kind of kills the whole good man thing too, doesn't it? I need to make sure I'm staying behind these speakers or I'm going to blow out everyone's ears. Because would a good man try to get other people to dedicate their lives and their souls to that person over a lie? If they knew it was a lie? That's not what a good person would do. So he could have just been a good man and a good teacher. Seems like I died here. rock star for a little bit.
Thank you. So yeah, he couldn't have just been a good man. He couldn't have just been a good teacher. Because he would have been teaching lies. But maybe he believed them. And in our society, if someone says, I am the Son of God, and they believe it, that makes them kind of crazy, doesn't it? If it's not true. So I did a little research on this too. So here are some of these symptoms that you look for when somebody has some sort of mental illness. First one is confused thinking. Not even his worst critics will ever say that Jesus seemed like he was confused. Extremely high and low moods, long-lasting sadness and irritability, excessive fear, worry, or strong feelings of anger. What kind of strong emotions did Jesus have? Even while people were killing him, he was praying for their forgiveness. How about social withdrawal? Even at his most stressed moment in the garden, he wanted his friends with him. That doesn't sound like he's trying to pull away from his friends. Dramatic changes in eating or sleeping habits. He ate a meal with his friends right before he knew he was going to die. It doesn't look like he was changing those habits at all. Hallucinations. I don't think it mentions anywhere, any time that Jesus was hallucinating. Alright, increasing inability to cope with daily problems and activities. Not only did he deal with his own problems and issues and activities, but he dealt with everybody else's. Even when he saw the people coming to kill him, he didn't run away from it. He stood up and dealt with it. Thoughts of suicide. He was praying for the ability for God to allow him to live. He wanted to live, but he wanted God's will more. So he had no thoughts of committing suicide. Denial of obvious problems. Like I just said, he actually rose up to meet the people who were coming to arrest and kill him. Unexplained physical problems, he never showed any of those. Or how about the last one that they were showing here, abuses of drugs or alcohol. Remember how I said that he refused to even partake in anything that was a fruit of the vine? He absolutely refused any kind of alcohol that could have dulled the senses of what he was going to go through. So he was not abusing anything in any way there. So that doesn't make sense. Well, how about we go to a professional opinion, because I'm just standing up in a pulpit and was a substitute teacher. I'm obviously no professional. But we have a man named Peter Kreeft. Not sure how to say that last name. But he is quoted in saying, Jesus had an abundance of precisely those three qualities which liars and lunatics most conspicuously lack. His practical wisdom, which is his ability to read human hearts. His deep, winning love and passionate compassion. His ability to attract people and make them feel at home and forgiven. His authority, and above all, his ability to astonish, his unpredictability, his creativity. Liars and lunatics are really dull and predictable. Nobody who knows the Gospels and the human beings can seriously entertain the possibility that Jesus was a liar, or a lunatic, or a bad man. Which leaves us with only one conclusion. He believed in what he was saying because it was true. So moving on to the last part of our story here. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus to the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him, saying, "Hail the King of the Jews." And then they spit on him, and took a staff, and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put on his own clothes. And then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and they were offering Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. Then they had crucified him. They divided up his clothes by lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed writing of the charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days? And save yourself, come down from that cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders mocked him and saved others. They said, "But he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all of the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a spud and filled it with wine and vinegar, put it on a stick and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And then Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks split, and the tombs broke open, and bodies of many holy people who had died raised to life. And they came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection. They went to the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified, and God exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there watching from a distance, and they had followed Jesus from Galilee to take care of his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Joseph. Joseph? That's probably Jesus. And mother of Zebedee's sons. As the evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea, named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb he had cut out of a rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance of the tomb, and he went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting on opposite sides of the tomb. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. "Sir," they said, "we remember that while he was still alive, the deceiver said, 'After 3 days he will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell people he has been raised from the dead. His last deception will be worse than the first." "Take a guard," Pilate answered. "Go, make the tomb as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure by putting the seal on the stone and posting a guard. After the Sabbath at dawn, on the 1st day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, and an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. So go quickly and tell the disciples he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away and went to the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy. They ran to the disciples, and suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. I almost feel like that would be kind of a sarcastic greeting after what happened. Like, I could just imagine seeing my best friend, my teacher, brutally murdered. And then 3 days later, I see him walking down the road and he goes, "Hey!" Hi! That was really high-pitched and loud. I apologize for that. They came to him. They clasped at his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to him, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and they will see me there." And while the women were on their way, some of the guards went to the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. And when the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say that the disciples came in the night and stole him while you were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." Now that's a line that tends to get glossed over, but I'm going to dive into that here in a moment. So the soldiers took the money, did as they were instructed, and the story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. So as I was coming up with the sermon, I realized that there haven't been too many sermons that I have heard talking about the protections that they actually put in place over this tomb. So I did some research. I'm not sure how well you can see that up there, but in many Christian depictions of artwork of the tomb has this big, large circle stone that is fairly easily rolled around by one or two men. Even though they did exist, they were very rare. They've only found 2 or 3 tombs that have actually had a stone like that, and they were reserved for the most high of society. Not necessarily a man who was executed as a criminal. It was more likely that his tombstone actually looked like this one, shaped like a cork, in which it had to actually be slid into a hole. And when they're talking about rolling the stone away, they were talking about actually pulling it out and then turning it on its edge, or flipping it face down, hence rolling the stone away. These stones would be very heavy. We're talking about 1 to 2 tons. How often, or how well do you think someone would be able to sleep through a bunch of men trying to pull a 2-ton stone out of a hole? I'm not sure how much manual labor some of you have done in your lifetime, but I can tell you that even a small stone, there might be some grunting involved. And maybe some stone sliding against stone and a big kaboom as it rolled over. I'd have a hard time sleeping through that. The next layer of defense was the seal. I don't have a picture of the seal, but I did some research. It was either a cord or a chain that was actually stretched from the side of the cave and attached to the stone itself that was actually capping this tomb. And on it would have the seal of the Roman Empire. Now, even if someone couldn't read, there was something very specific about this. That these seals were made of wax. After it was attached, it was sealed with wax and pressed with this Roman seal. If that was cracked, broken, or disturbed in any way by someone other than a Roman officer or someone given authority by the Roman government, it was punishable by death. So it wasn't a very common thing for someone to go and try cracking one of these seals open. The last layer of protection they had was the Roman guard. And now we see all these pictures and all of these paintings of a few Roman guards kind of like sleeping in front of the tomb. The guard would look a little bit more like this, where they were standing roughly about 3 feet away from each other. Because the Roman guard, when they were set for a guard duty, comprised of 16 soldiers. 16 soldiers, each are responsible for a 6-foot area around them. They were not allowed to sit, they were not allowed to lean, and in many cases, as we do have example of it, I'm jumping all ahead of my notes here, so I don't have the actual... There it is. Nope, that's not it. I'm jumping ahead. If a soldier had fallen asleep and nothing happened, but he was caught sleeping, that soldier was killed. It was a death sentence for that soldier. If a soldier fell asleep and he was caught falling asleep and something did happen, hence a prisoner escaping or whatever they were guarding going missing, like, I don't know, a body, the entire 16-man guard was executed. And they weren't just executed like, okay, done. They were taken in front of their platoon, and their fellow soldiers would then either beat them with cudgels or stone them to death. So it is not very likely that even one of these soldiers would have fallen asleep, because his friends would say, look, if something happens, we're all gonna die. I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to die for someone else's few Z's that he might want to try to catch. And this wouldn't have been a very common thing for soldiers to fall asleep, because it was made very public whenever one of these soldiers would happen to fail at their duty. So, anyway, a little mini sermon in there as to some of the history of what the Romans like to do. Now, as far as the last paragraph in the story. When the 11 disciples made it to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go, when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some had doubted. When Jesus came to them, he said, "By all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am always going to be with you to the very end of the age." These were Jesus' last words. His victory speech, if you will. But also the last time he spoke to his disciples that I have found recorded. Now, if you were going to give someone last words, you would want those words to be the most impactful words that you would ever be able to tell that person. And he said, go. Tell other people about what happened. Tell them about me. And teach them to obey the things that I have done and that I have commanded. That order was never rescinded. So today, while we are going out, while we are partying, while we are singing our hymns, or whatever you would like to sing, while we are dancing like fools, while we were sitting and eating ourselves silly, which is a sin, don't do that, eat and have fun. Just don't overdo it, because you're going to pay for it later anyway. Take some time. Talk to somebody about why we are actually celebrating. Why are we sitting here eating this food? This big Easter ham? all of these mashed potatoes, making me feel like I'm a turkey that got stuffed. Why are we doing that? Everyone here no longer has an excuse to be able to say that I don't know. Because now you do. So go and share it. Share why we are supposed to be joyful. And while you're out there telling people why we're supposed to be joyful, tell your face. Tell your spirit. Tell yourself that you are joyful. Show it. Be so happy that it makes other people uncomfortable. And with that, I shall release you. Alright, so do we have any more songs?